if I go back to Greco-Roman biographies like Suetonius's 12 Lives of the 12 Divine Caesars or Plutarch's Lives and things like that, what kind of rules were they using back then? And they reported with a flexibility of details that we wouldn't necessarily use today. So I wanted to learn what were their rules and then take those and apply it to the Gospels to see if that would, what kind of light that might shed on the differences. Were we asking the wrong question? Instead of asking, how can we harmonize these differences, should we instead have been asking, why are these differences here to begin with? And I found that that is the more appropriate question to ask. And if we approach the Gospels a little bit differently and view them through the lenses of first century biography, it's amazing how many of these differences just vanish because we can understand why they're there.
So what are the questions that we need to ask about the Gospels and these various differences?
Well, so I would look and I'd say, all right, so why are they there to begin with? So the first thing we'd say is, all right, if I were writing about an important person in antiquity, and I was writing in antiquity, okay, about an important person, what genre would I use? Would I use biography, horror fiction, or poetry? Well, of course I'd use biography. And if I'm a biographer writing in the first century to reading in the first century about a person who had lived in the first century, would I write using the rules that were in play for writing biography in the first century, or those that wouldn't come into play for well over 1,000 years? Well, of course, the answer is I'm going to use the rules that were in play in the first century. So let's learn what those rules were. Let's learn those kind of compositional devices. What's the reason that you're writing biography? And we find the answer to that in Plutarch. Who's the greatest ancient biographer. He wrote just after the Gospels, almost like John finished writing his Gospel, Plutarch starts.
What year would that be?
Probably around the year 95, 96. He starts writing his lives, Plutarch's lives. They're called lives then, not biographies. And he wrote over 60 of them, of which 48 have survived. Much of what we know about the ancient world comes from Plutarch. He's a great writer, okay? So as I'm reading through these 50, I start off with these 48 biographies. I notice that 9 of the 48 involve people who lived at the same time. Most of them knew one another, participated in many of the same events, which means that Plutarch is going to tell the same story on multiple occasions. So did he copy and paste? What did he do? So what I did was I went through them a second time and a third time, and I made very detailed outlines of all the stories in them, and then I compared and I found 36 stories that Plutarch tells 2 or more times. 30 of them contain differences, and then I looked very carefully and cataloged the differences, and I started to notice a pattern. Patterns started to evolve, or I started to recognize them. So I'd see Plutarch on a regular basis that he would compress an account. In one narrative, he would narrate it as it occurred. On another, he might compress it as though it happened on over a shorter period of time, just for brevity purposes. Or he might displace an event from its proper chronological context and transplant it in a different one in order to make a point. So the event happened, it just happened at a different time. Or he may conflate people or events. Well, we do that today as well.
Sure.
So he could conflate, or literary spotlighting, I call it. And that's when you've been in a theatrical performance and you see these people on stage, and then all of a sudden the lights go out and a spotlight shines on a single actor. You know others are on stage, but you don't see them because there's so much focus on this. Well, it could be in one story, Plutarch mentions a couple actors involved in a certain event, but in the same story in a different biography that's focused on that particular person as the main character, he only mentions the main character doing it. The others aren't even mentioned, so shining his literary spotlight on that. So you see these kinds of things going on. Plutarch does on a regular basis. I think I give 6 or somewhere around that of these compositional devices. And then you have compositional textbooks, which were around in that day. And the elite, the educated, would use these in their secondary and tertiary education in their mid-teens. They already knew how to read and write, but now they're learning how to write well. And so they learn how to paraphrase and things like that. And there's all these techniques that they were trained to do, and it says, this is how you write. So it's like, okay, well, if we go to Plutarch, we ought to see this going on, and we do. Well, shouldn't we see this then when we go to the Gospels? So that's what I did. Now I go to the Gospels and I read them in view of how people were taught to write, and these compositional devices I noticed Plutarch using, spotlighting, displacement, transferal, compression, conflation, things like that. And wow, that makes perfect sense of many of these differences in the Gospels. It's really eye-opening